Construction waste is so much more of an issue than people would think. Municipal solid waste, the waste that you take to the curb, is really kind of insignificant compared to construction waste.
We have now grown very sensitive to how many plastic bags do we use, or how do we live our life, do we drive an electric car or not. But then there is the built environment, which is this sort of black box to many of us, which in the end, if you look at that pie chart, right, is the biggest emitter of emissions.
I mean, the built environment has been really overlooked in many ways. There's a sort of blind spot when it comes to retaining materials and the value and skills and invisible but very important labor that goes into maintaining our cities.
The most often used definition of a circular economy is that it is an economy that is restorative and regenerative by design, that keeps the highest utility and value of all products, components, and elements at all times. While this is a fantastic global aspiration, and all of, or most of the conversation that is happening right now is on this very global level, like a country should do this. It is extremely difficult to then apply this thinking locally because it is so different from context to context.
There were about 17 buildings that were, and still are, slated for demolition here in Ithaca. And as a preservationist and as a professor who teaches land use planning, I was concerned about both what would happen to those existing buildings and what would be developed in its place.
Professor Minner and I intersected. We quickly brought in the Christofferson Center, the Susan B. Christofferson Center for Community Planning, and started to have those conversations about what about reusing, what about repurposing, what about existing buildings and climate retrofit as well. And CR0WD, which is circularity, reuse, zero waste development, developed out of that.
Our goals essentially are to inform and support local policymaking. On the one hand side, simply providing necessary data. There's very little data available about local construction, and so our lab and CR0WD is working on resource guides or simply the provision of foundational knowledge, right?
The Salvage and Deconstruction Survey, the S&D survey, is an audit of the materials in a building. It works very much at the same stage as any kind of survey that would happen for currently demolition. So that includes like hazardous materials surveys as well as like structural surveys.
We have been looking at various spatial statistical ways of analyzing the distribution of building permits to really understand how those are a part of urban processes of change.
If you look at any community, anywhere you go, I think people are really interested in authentic. So that's number one factor. If you look at how the next generations seem to be talking and saying, they're very interested in the reuse world. They are really concerned about the planet. So you have to make sure that like all of those things are connected.
I've always been interested in what's been titled as upcycling. And it's because I find history really interesting. And as I've gone into architecture, there's architecture history, but there's also a history of our building materials.
It's an act of creativity. It's an act of maintaining that historical artistry and technology and embedding it into our ongoing lives. So I think it's an act of cultural heritage. And when you do that at a much bigger scale, on the scale of a whole city, a whole district, a whole community, or a whole region, it's really got to change the way that we design and preserve and construct I think that's really exciting. I think it can lead to new jobs and new skills. I see crowd as this participatory action research in which all of the actors that are involved, all of the individuals and organizations, bring a lot of energy and excitement to this question of how do we do things really differently.
This wood here, I can guarantee, is harder than anything you're getting at Home Depot. I can guarantee it.